Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of IBL On Deck, sponsored by Rawlings. My name is Jackson Farough. Great to be with you once again as we continue our team-by-team series here on IBL On Deck, inching ever so close to the summer months and hopefully the 2021 IBL season. Now, a couple weeks ago, we caught up with co-owner of the London Majors, Scott Dart. Had a great conversation. Definitely go check that one out. Even if you're not a London Majors fan, if you're just an IBL fan, I guarantee you'll learn something from that. We also had an announcement last week from IBL Commissioner John Kitchener, which is up on the IBL's YouTube page as of now. He gives an update on where we're at right now with the 2021 IBL season. But for today's featured team that is, we're going to take a trip over to Kitchener and talk with the president of the Kitchener Panthers. It's Bill Pegg. Bill, thanks so much for joining us today.
Good to be here. And I'm not a London fan either, but I did listen to the show and it was excellent.
Oh, well, I appreciate that, Bill. See, listeners, definitely follow Bill's advice there and check it out. Now, Bill, on to your team here, Kitchener. We're going to talk about the Panthers a little bit, but first, a little bit about you. You know, as president of a ball club, what does the day-to-day look like for you, let's say during a normal season?
Well, during a normal season, of course, like all of the clubs, so we have a lot of volunteers and we all have different jobs that we do. And so my job day to day, and of course, once the season starts, a lot of our work is done.
Right.
And now we get to the easy part of the season, and that is playing the games. That's what we do all the work for in advance. And so once the season starts, my job tends to be more on an operational level at the games, coordinating the volunteers, and everybody knows what to do. It's not like I have to get there and say, oh, okay, you do this, and everything. I don't. Everybody knows exactly what they're going to do. We're very fortunate in that regard. Concessions, announcers, front gate, you name it. Like all the teams, everybody knows their job. And so I'm kind of spending my time kind of half watching the game and half just kind of checking to make sure everything is okay. And then, and in between times, road games, I like to go to most of the games. Myself and our general manager, Mike Beamer, we're usually on the bus or driving our cars. And so again, the season and the playing and the players on the field is really the icing on the cake for us. For all the work we've done, now we get to enjoy the fruits of our labor.
Of course. Now, how long have you been president of Kitchener for?
Well, I took over the juniors in 1999,
okay.
And then they were associated with the seniors. And then in 2005, I essentially took over as the secretary of the ball club and was running a lot of the day-to-day operations. And so I guess officially I became president sometime after that. And one of the first things I did was reincorporate the ball club as a not-for-profit.
Right. Now,
so 15 years.
Okay. Now, how has the IBL, do you think, changed since maybe when you first started in the league versus where it's at now in 2021?
I think on the business side of the operations, which is mostly what I do, I think all of the teams are better run businesses, better run business models. And of course, it has to be a good business model because it's not inexpensive to run a team. Field costs, baseballs, umpires, travel. Players don't necessarily live right in our backyard anymore. They might come from around southwestern Ontario. So, of course, we have to pay them some gas money to get here and stuff like that. So it's more expensive to put a team on the field now. There are more regulations from the municipalities for the parks. So everything is just done in greater detail and greater expectation than it was 15, 20, 25 years ago.
So if someone wants to become a president of an IBL club one day, what's one thing they need to know before they jump in?
So do you mean president or or owning a club? There's a difference.
Let's start president. Let's say president.
So if it's president, I think, again, I can look around at some of the teams. For example, Barrie, Dave Mills is the president of the ball club.
Sure.
And so their business model is a wee bit different than ours. But so I think the president has to be able to recruit good people, particularly on the volunteer side. And a key to recruiting those good people is they have to have an affinity for the game. You're not going to get too many people who really don't like baseball who want to be around the ballpark.
Yeah.
And so the other thing that I think the president has to be able to do in today's IBL is have either himself or herself and people around in the volunteer role who can go out and mine in the community for some dollars, sponsorship dollars. It's very important. So the president, one of my big jobs is solidifying the importance of the Panthers existing in our community. We're a 100-year-old team. We're an institution. And so when companies sponsor us, let's face it, it's not like sponsoring the Kitchener Rangers with 7,500 people in the stands. It's a commitment by the sponsors to support a 100-year-old institution and the role that we have in the community. So that's probably my biggest role as president on the business side. And then on the baseball side is having good people, like Mike Beamer and Scott Ballantyne and our baseball people who look after getting those players onto the field, coaches, field manager, and all of that kind of stuff. That's their job, which I really don't get too involved in.
Okay.
I let them do it because I can't. I've got too many other things to do.
Yeah, that makes sense. Now, shifting gears here a little bit, I was reading that you had mentioned in an article that you actually attended the Blue Jays' very first home opener.
I did.
Can you tell us about that experience? I hear it was kind of cold.
It was Section 18, Row 2. And so we were basically over the catcher's right shoulder. And we were, Section 18 there was a pathway concourse that went around between the lower section and the upper section in that new part that they built. And so we got there and it was snowing. It was snowing on the way down. And it was just the way you see it on, on all of the clips. It was a good game. Bill Singer was pitching and he got the win. But the one thing for me personally, I had been to many games because we used to go to Detroit, still do occasionally, to watch baseball. And I lived in Windsor for a while, and there wasn't I probably went to three quarters of the games that year in Detroit. But for me in Toronto that day, it wasn't bitterly cold, but obviously it was cold enough to be snowing hard at sometimes. And they were brushing off the field so that the lines would appear. But I wasn't a big CFL football fan. So I had never attended really an event where I was going to be sitting. And I did not have the proper clothing. I did not have the proper footwear. And if you recall Exhibition Stadium, the seats were aluminum.
Right.
I can't begin to tell you how cold those seats were. And they do not get warm. You could sit on them for a year and a half, and they will not get warm. In the summertime, they're hot, and they will not get cold. But when I left there, I was so cold, and my feet were wet, and it was all my fault. I mean, but nevertheless, I like to say I was one of the 500,000 people who say they were there.
Well, yeah, it's an experience, right?
And I still have the tickets.
Oh, there
If
you
you'd
go.
like to see them, I'll hold them up for you.
That's fascinating. Speaking of which, so for our younger fans,
yes,
in those early days, what was the feeling around the Blue Jays? Was it optimism, skepticism? What was the mood?
Well, there's two kinds of fans, Jackson. There's real hardcore ball fans, which I would consider myself a hardcore fan. I played the game, and I love baseball. I love baseball at all ages. So most of us and most of my friends who went to the games with us, because we had seasons tickets, although we were hardcore, we weren't under any illusions. So we were hopeful, but not under any illusions. But the non-hardcore fan, of course, well, the Blue Jays aren't very good, and they would go on and on and on and on and on. So you had to have faith that they were building something for the future. Mm-hmm. And all of those young players that were there, many of whom were around for 5, 6, 7 years. There was a core of them, and so I personally was so happy that there was Major League Baseball in Toronto. I would have probably preferred a National League team when they were talking about San Francisco coming over. But however, baseball is baseball, and lots of times we would follow the Blue Jays into Detroit. That famous series in, 1984, 1987, when Detroit won the last 7 games or whatever against the Blue Jays. It was pretty amazing, I got to tell you. And so when you're a fan, you're a fan. It's thick and thin.
Absolutely. And and credit to you for sticking with them this whole time, and they're doing great now. And obviously it's a pretty special day tonight because the biggest signing in franchise history is debuting. But let's talk a little bit about Kitchener here. Back-to-back trips to the Minico Cup final in 2018 and 2019. Back-to-back losses to Barrie. Now, when we were talking to Hamilton's GM, Jeff Lounsbury, he said the pandemic really dampened the momentum that he and his club had been building towards. And your club had some momentum too, right? Back-to-back finals. How do you keep that momentum going in the organization in the midst of a pandemic? Is there even an answer really to it, or do you just kind of feel it out?
Well, I've never been through it before.
Exactly, yeah.
So, and actually, in our case, we were 4 out of the last 5 finals we were in. And so how do we keep that going? Well, of course, in the IBL, like any team, the players and the talent ebbs and flows. We this year, coming into last year and coming into this year, we've had a lot of our older players have decided to call it a day. It's a big commitment for players who have jobs and who have families and who have kids. And I mean, just take a look at the Barrie Club, where they had that core of 6 or 7 guys who were together for all those years. And Angus once told me, he said, once 1 or 2 of them drops off, probably the rest are going to drop off. And I have a feeling that's kind of what's happening this year. That's not a bad thing. They had a great run. Those guys aren't kids anymore, and they want to get on with their lives. And we're experiencing the same thing. So on the upside, we're going to have, our average age is probably going to go down. Well, I can tell you, if Andy Leader is going to be one of the oldest players on the team, does that tell you what our average age is going to be? So that's the way it goes. But the one thing that has changed is I think the days are gone when players are going to hang on into their late 20s and early 30s. I think we've seen the end of that. We're never going to see another Sean Riley. Not going to happen. We're never going to see another Jeff Pietrowski. It's not going to happen. And so what we in the IBL have to do, I think, is we have to encourage all those young players who are going to college, particularly college in the States, who want to be drafted and who want to go to the big leagues. And if they don't make it, and you yourself, what those odds are. They're pretty slim. So our challenge is to try and get those players who are returning home to maybe keep playing the game for just the sheer joy of playing the game. And if they're local players, believe me, fans want to see local. You ask any team in the league, fans want to see the local players. The last time we won the championship in 2001, every player was from the Waterloo region.
Wow.
So that's the challenge on the player side. The business challenge hasn't changed.
So kind of speaking to that, Stephen Whalen was announced recently. He had re-signed with the Panthers, won the Silver Slugger Award in the OUA, playing third base with the University of Waterloo. right?
Yeah.
So in your experience as president of a club, we kind of talked about it a little bit, but I'd like you to go a little more in depth. How important is the OUA / NCAA / college important to the development of players in the IBL, and vice versa? Like that symbiotic relationship, how does it kind of play out, and where do you see it going?
So Stephen's a good example. Now, Stephen has been with the Panthers for a couple of years. In his last year of junior, he played up sometimes, and very good third baseman. Good hands, good glove. Struggled at the plate. Not unusual. Players that are coming out of junior or college ball, OUA ball, they have to learn how to hit. They have to learn how to face good pitching. And by and large, all of the IBL teams, particularly with the use of import players, and we've always emphasized with our imports, bringing in pitchers. So chances are you take a guy like Stephen Whalen, he's going up there against a fellow from Barrie who, has had more than one cup of coffee in the major leagues. Well, that's, let's face it, that's pretty tough. But Stephen will be, like a lot of players like himself, he will be a better player in his third year. Mike Glinka, arguably one of our best shortstops ever, including Farough from Cuba. Mike Glinka really struggled for the first couple of years. But then you could gradually see him coming around. And he became that line drive hitter that he was in college, with the junior club and with OUA. Now, talking about the OUA, though, the OUA is a far better league for baseball than it was a decade ago. I mean, there's no comparison in my view. And that's because all of the good people who are involved, again, Scott Ballantyne, Ben Norris, Jeff Lounsbury, all the people who are involved in the OUA and in recruiting players, they're managing also to recruit players who, rather than going to the States, they're saying, you know what, I can stay here and play OUA ball. I like playing it. And I can play senior ball in the summer. And I can get a good, and I don't want to knock schools in the States, but I can stay here and get a good education. And it's not going to cost me a fortune, or my parents. And a good example was Mike Glinka. Mike is now Dr. Glinka. And so, he's a very talented individual. He could have gone to a D1 school, no problem. But he chose to stay here. So the OUA, I think, is doing a much better job of attracting those good players who also are good students.
Now, let's say you were commissioner of the IBL.
Mm-hmm.
What would you do? What would be one of the first things you did to continue to grow the game in the future north of the border?
Well, I would really like, as we all would, this is not new, I would really like to see a couple more teams. I'd like to, it would be nice to see another team down in the London direction, Chatham, Sarnia, somewhere like that. Windsor's a little too far, I'm afraid. But I would also like to see a team over in the Oshawa area again. That whole Durham region over there, Oshawa, Pickering, and everything. They have really good minor ball organizations. They really do. A lot of good players come out of there, and there's some good private organizations that have developed over there as well. And so they've done a very good job with developing players. So it would be really nice if we could get a new team at either end of the spectrum in the IBL. And if we had 10 teams, we could go with 2 divisions, 2 5-team divisions, cut down on the travel a little bit. Because remember, even the young players, even if it's only summer jobs, they're working. Yeah. They're working in the summer. One of my concerns this year, if we do hit the field, is if we're not able to take buses. Because if we're not, so we got a Tuesday night game in Barrie, and we all have to drive there, or vice versa. They have to drive here. And you finish up at 10:30. You get changed and everything, and you got to drive all the way home, and you got to get up to work, go to work the next day. I mean, it's tough. It's tough for these players, even though they're young guys. I mean, I was young once too, and I had lots of energy, but still, to get home at 1 o'clock in the morning, and then you got to get up and go to work at 7:30. So. That's why it's nice to take the bus, because players are together, and the players, they arrive together, they get home together. They can snooze on the bus if they want before they get home, and so it's but it's one of the many unknowns of this coming season. We don't know even what we don't know.
Exactly. That's a good point you make. So what would be considered a successful IBL season at this point? Is there a certain amount of games played or a number of fans you can get in the seats? Is there a threshold for that? Like, what would you consider a success at this point?
Well, we're thinking of a July 1st start, which would be I think 28 games Herb has got.
Sure.
That's an umbrella.
We've got July 15th is another, I think, a 24 game. So what would I consider a success? What I would consider a success is if we could be on the field, if we could have, say, 30% capacity in our stadiums. And I think we would succeed in getting those numbers, if for no other reason than it would be a slingshot effect. So
now, last question here for you, Bill. Just as we look forward to that season, what else can Kitchener fans look forward to as we inch ever so closer to a hopeful start to the season?
A much younger team.
Yep.
A little different look at the ballpark. We're not sure about concessions and things like that. But if we get on the field, I think we're going to have some exciting baseball. It's going to be all Canadian players. Be no imports. And Mike and his crew have done a really good job on recruitment. They're not finished yet. And so our fans can look forward to seeing some really fresh young talent and playing as hard as they can. And to a person, all of these players are looking so forward to getting on the field. Mike talks to them regularly.
Well, Bill, we really appreciate it. Thanks so much for joining us today, and looking forward to the season. I'm sure we'll catch up down the road here. Thanks for doing this.
Thank you, Jackson. Take care.
All right, that was Bill Pegg, president of the Kitchener Panthers. Well, we appreciate you joining us today for yet another episode in our team-by-team series, getting closer and closer to that season, whenever it may end up being. So for Jackson Farough, for the IBL On Deck production crew and the IBL as a whole, and of course Rawlings as well, thank you for joining us. We'll see you next time, everyone.